All right, this is part two of the chapters 3 and 4 notes for The Great Gatsby. Usually in the notes, I highlight the things via a character. However, it is important to note that Gatsby's party almost takes on the role of another character in this book. They become larger than life, these parties. So you see a description of the party in this section where you have orchestras playing, multiple bars, large quantities of food and alcohol every weekend for largely a population that is uninvited. They just show up to his house. One of the most interesting questions about these parties is, where does all the alcohol come from? This is during the time of Prohibition. And the fact that Gatsby has access to large quantities of alcohol brings to mind some questions. Does he have connections? Is he involved in something like this? But it is something that you'll see as the book goes on. It'll shed some light as to how Gatsby has made his money as well. Another part of Gatsby's party that is significant is when Nick wanders into Gatsby's library. During this time period, libraries really were considered like a status symbol that somebody would have in their house. Old money people had pretty extensive libraries in their house. If you were a new money person and you were setting up your house, you want it to very much resemble that of an old money place. So what they would do is they would furnish a library. Well, furnishing a library, buying all those books, is extremely expensive. So oftentimes what people would do is they would cut corners. They would buy the book jacket instead of the book and the book jacket. And they would take the book jacket, the outer covering, and cover it with underneath with cardboard. So if you put it on a shelf, it actually looked like a book. Taking it off the shelf, that's when you would realize it was actually fake. Owl Eyes in the library is drunk and he's pulling the books off the shelf, just assuming that Gatsby has furnished his library in this cheap, fake way. And he's stunned when he actually finds that these books are real. Now, he does make a comment, offhanded comment, that the pages are not cut, meaning these books have not been read, kind of as a condescending statement. But the books themselves, that is the length that Gatsby is going to pass himself off as somebody who is old money. He wants the status symbol. He wants everything to look perfect. And having a perfect library is part of that. Also with Owl Eyes, you see at the end of this section that he actually is in a car accident with another drunk man. And as they're leaving, they hit an embankment with such force that a tire is actually torn off the car. Neither man has this concept of the seriousness of the situation or of the accident. They kind of just like bewildered, doesn't really grasp what they've done. Keep that in mind because you're going to see another car accident later in this book where you're going to have people who are just not really going to grasp the concept of what they are involved in. So just as a general thing, what I have starred down below is that Gatsby is isolated at his party. He formally salutes Nick as Nick is leaving. And it's very similar how he is at this party as is when we first see him in the book. He's alone. He's looking across a vast expanse. One is water, one is his partygoers. And he really is somebody who is just trying to remain in the shadows until the person he wants to see, which is Daisy, shows up. And unfortunately for him, that hasn't happened yet. And also notice the juxtaposition between Tom's party in New York City to Gatsby's party out in Long Island. They're very similar. They have different people attending, different social classes attending. But in both cases, these parties end in a drunken, contempt-filled event. In Tom's party, it was Tom punching Myrtle and breaking her nose. And in Gatsby's party, it is the car accident with Owl Eyes. So there is an interesting connection there. And the last one is Meyer Wolfsheim. Now, he is a very minor character to this book, but he's actually modeled after a real person. And there's a purpose for him to be in this book. Now, the two things that I have here about him is some stories that he recalls. One is which he talks about Rosie Rosenthal and how he was shot dead. That was a mob hit outside the Metropole. He notices that Nick is looking at his cufflinks, and he makes a comment the cufflinks are made from human teeth. The important part here is Meyer Wolfsheim has connections to organized crime. He also has connections to Gatsby through his business dealings. It stands to reason that if Meyer Wolfsheim and Gatsby are business partners in some kind of venture, and Myers Wolfsheim is in organized crime, so is Gatsby. So it's important to remember that because piece by piece, little by little, you're going to see what makes Gatsby who he is and how he's made his money. Gatsby actually comes right out and tells you that Meyer Wolfsheim is a gambler. He is modeled after Arnold Rothstein, who was the orchestrator behind the fixing of the 1919 World Series, which is why I had you have that on your term sheet before we started this book. So keep this in mind with Meyer Wolfsheim. He's a minor character. However, he is somebody who's very important because he does give you some information that you can connect with Gatsby and how he's made his money.